The demigods were never meant to agree with each other. They were designed, shaped, and unleashed to prove something about the world itself. Some were born perfect and still brought ruin. Others were born cursed and became its pillars. Some rebelled openly, others loved too deeply. Some tried to stop time, and one tried to replace the very idea of order with devotion. None of them broke the world alone. They broke it by responding, in radically human ways, to a system that demanded obedience over life. This is why their bloodlines matter, not because they failed to live up to divinity, but because they succeeded too well at reflecting it. Every demigod is a verdict, not on fate, but on the god who believed control could last forever. And at the center of that belief stands Marika. Before we part, the Golden Order grows through faith, and this archive is still young. If you'd like to walk alongside it, one quiet gesture is enough. You have my thanks. Sincerely. What happened to the lands between is often framed as a war of ambition, but it begins as something smaller and far more dangerous. Inheritance. When the Elden Ring shattered, it wasn't claimed by strangers or invaders. It fractured along family lines, and the world followed. Each demigod inherited more than power. They inherited a worldview, a boundary, a contradiction they were never allowed to resolve. The Shattering is not chaos erupting from nowhere. It is order collapsing under the weight of its own design. To understand why the world rots, stagnates, or drowns in blood, you have to look at what was passed down, what was denied, and what was punished. The children are not symptoms of decay. They are evidence. Evidence that the system they were born into could not survive contact with real will, real love, or real defiance. That system begins with Marika. Before the demigods ever drew breath, the world they would inherit was already narrowed. The Golden Order promised stability through hierarchy, eternity through correction. Life that fit its logic was elevated. Life that didn't was buried, sealed away, or rewritten as heresy. Divine lineage became proof of legitimacy, not just to rule, but to define what existence was allowed to look like. Godhood was no longer a state of balance between forces. It became a legal structure, enforced through blood. Two unions formalized this structure. One forged strength through conquest and conquest through loyalty. The other pursued perfection through reflection, doubling authority until contradiction could no longer be ignored. When Radagon was revealed not as consort but as continuation, the problem became unavoidable. This was not a dynasty expanding outward. It was a single will attempting to govern itself from opposing directions. Children born into this system were never given freedom. They were given roles: to uphold the order, to embody its virtues, to absorb its sins. By the time the first crown was placed on a demigod's head, the outcome was already decided. The design itself ensured fracture, and it was authored by Marika. The first generation is often treated as a moral split between success and failure, but the truth is less clean. Godwyn was everything the Order wanted to present to the world: radiant, beloved, unchallenging. His existence suggested the system worked. That illusion died with him, and the manner of his death matters more than the act itself. He did not rebel. He did not resist. He was removed, surgically, to prove that even perfection could be discarded when it became inconvenient. Beneath the capital, the twins born alongside that golden promise were hidden like evidence. Morgoth learned loyalty as a survival skill, defending the very structure that chained him. Mog learned something else entirely. Where one internalized shame, the other externalized wrath, turning rejection into doctrine and blood into sacrament. The children born of the Second Union fractured in different directions. Ranni refused the premise outright, discarding flesh to escape control and rewriting destiny around cold autonomy. Radan chose fixation instead of refusal, halting the stars themselves to preserve a moment he could endure. Rykard embraced open blasphemy, not as madness, but as a logical endpoint for a system that devoured dissent. None of these paths overlap. but they share a root. Each is a response to a world that offered power without consent and demanded obedience without understanding. They are not parallel failures. They are incompatible answers to the same impossible inheritance. What changes when you look closer is not the facts, but the pressure behind them. The so-called curses are not random afflictions. They cluster around everything the Golden Order tried to erase. The omen horns resemble crucible growth, remnants of a time when life was allowed to overlap and mutate. Blood magic mirrors older sacramental rites where vitality was sacred rather than controlled. Gravity sorcery reaches outward toward the cosmos the Order insisted should remain distant and inert. Blasphemy does not appear as madness here. It appears as an alternative logic filling the space repression left behind. Even rejection takes structure. Even rebellion follows rules. This is why loyalty becomes the most tragic outcome of all. Morgott does not merely obey. He polices himself, internalizing rejection until duty replaces identity. His vigilance is not rewarded with acceptance, only silence. Ranni represents the opposite failure state. She refuses inheritance entirely, but the cost of escape is disembodiment. Freedom demands self-erasure. Both outcomes expose the same truth. The system allows neither dissent nor belonging. You are either absorbed or removed. Even those who seem to win do so by narrowing themselves. Power is granted only when it can be predicted. Love is tolerated only when it reinforces hierarchy. Choice exists, but only inside corridors already built. The demigods do not break these corridors. They run into the walls at full speed, revealing their shape through impact. What we call madness, heresy, or curse is simply the moment a living will exceeds the space it was permitted to occupy. Seen this way, the demigods stop looking like tragedies and start looking like stress tests. Each one reveals a limit the system could not reconcile. Loyalty without acceptance becomes self-erasure. Power without freedom becomes obsession. Compassion without consent becomes coercion. The more tightly reality was narrowed, the more violently it pushed back through the only vessels available. The divine bloodline itself. What looks like corruption is, in fact, expression. The Order did not fail because its children were flawed. It failed because it demanded they not be whole. There is a small detail that often gets passed over because it feels too gentle to matter. Radon did not master gravity to conquer the stars. He learned it so he could keep riding his horse. The most extreme act of cosmic control in recorded history begins as an act of care. That contrast matters. It reveals how warped the system had become, where compassion could only survive if it disguised itself as domination. Even love had to become violent to persist. When the world rewards strength but punishes vulnerability, even kindness learns to wear armor. By the time the twins born of a single will enter the story, the question is no longer whether the system can endure strain, but whether it was ever meant to. Millennia embodies inevitability. The rot is not framed as moral failure or weakness. It is pressure, given form, a force that blooms whenever containment is prioritized over balance. Every attempt to suppress it only sharpens its return. Victory for her is survival, not conquest, and even that comes at the cost of becoming a vector for something older and larger than herself. Miquella represents the other extreme. Where rot destroys openly, charm reshapes quietly. Eternal childhood is not his danger. It is his cover. He does not command through fear or law, but through devotion, drawing followers who believe they chose him freely. The Halig Tree is not a mistake. It is also not free. Shadow of the Erd Tree makes clear that devotion, once cultivated, behaves like gravity. Followers do not leave because they no longer remember why they came. Care becomes infrastructure. Belief becomes architecture. What looks like mercy stabilizes into control, not through law, but through dependence. This is not gentler power. It is quieter. It is a prototype, an attempt to build an order where suffering is managed through love rather than punishment. Shadow of the Erd Tree makes this tension explicit. Compassion and control are never separated. Influence becomes indistinguishable from care. In these twins, the final inheritance is revealed. When authority turns inward, it produces either collapse or seduction. Both are answers. Neither is freedom. What finally collapses is the question itself. Cursed blood or divine genius was never a choice placed on the children. It was a judgment imposed after the damage was done. What they inherit is not a flaw, but a mandate to live inside contradictions without room to breathe. Some rot because stagnation is enforced. Some rebel because obedience is framed as virtue. Some rule through fear. Some through affection. None of these outcomes are accidents. They are the predictable shapes life takes when plurality is treated as threat. When difference is framed as danger, survival demands extremity. Moderation becomes invisibility. Balance becomes betrayal. The demigods escalate not because they are unstable, but because the world only responds when something finally breaks loud enough to be heard. A god who tries to excise chaos does not eliminate it. Chaos returns as personality, belief, and will. The demigods do not fail the system. They complete it. That legacy belongs to Marika. So the question left behind is not which child was right or wrong, but whether any order built on denial can ever produce heirs who are allowed to be whole.